Good morning. I'm Charlene. I'm Charlene Zelanko. Happy Mother's Day to all mothers and others that nurture us in numerous ways. I'd like to begin by saying that although I will be mainly using the term mother, I refer not only to one's biological mother, but to whomever filled that role, be it adoptive, foster mother, grandparent, nanny, step-parent, aunt, or anyone, regardless of gender, who filled the role of primary nurturer and caregiver. So let's look at that role. Callie McDaniel, author of the book Mother Hunger, writes, if there was a job description for motherhood, it might look something like this. The ideal candidate must be a self-starter, able to comfort and bond with a new vulnerable human by holding, feeding, and responding to nonverbal cues. Responsibilities include protecting this human from external threats and actively engaging in their academic, spiritual, and social, as well as physical development. Candidates should possess equal parts tenderness and strength, grace under pressure, and healthy boundaries. This job is unpaid. Now, why would anyone sign up for this job? It's demanding, often underappreciated, sometimes thankless or heartbreaking, and the pay is terrible. Not to mention the need to be on call 24 hours a day for the better of what, 18 to 30 years or more? This time of year, most stores as well as the internet abound with glorious praise for mothers, for all they do, the sacrifices they make, and their importance in our lives. Accolades aside, how does a mother or anyone survive this role without a fairly robust support system? This is no doubt why they say it takes a village to raise a child. It is also likely why the breakdown of that ideal of the village in today's increasingly individualistic culture leads to so much struggle and strife in the world, as mothers of all types struggle to provide the needs of the next generation without the full support required to raise secure, psychologically and emotionally healthy humans. It is now known that the human brain development is very much tied to how well our initial needs are met, and hospitals employ volunteer baby cuddlers for infants staying in the hospital without their mothers, in order for the child to have a chance to thrive. Physical connection and attention are as vital as nutrition to a new human being. According to McDaniels, there are 3 essential elements required of mothering: nurturance, protection, and guidance. The primary ones for infants are nurturance and protection, while guidance comes later. If we are deprived of one or more of these developmental needs, we are likely to struggle with insecure attachment or worse as we mature. Without nurturance, we may grow up hungry for touch and belonging. Without protection, we might be anxious and afraid. And without guidance, we may lack direction and have difficulties making choices and decisions and taking risks. These difficulties are just some of the symptoms of mother hunger. While it may seem like another excuse to blame mothers for our problems, it is not. Mothers love and care for us the best that they are able, but they cannot provide what they themselves may not have. Alternatively, too many demands on their time and energy and too little support to provide for a child's needs can limit what they are able to provide. We all too frequently don't have the luxury of waiting until we are ready and better able to provide for our offspring, or we may not even be aware of the extent of their needs until before becoming parents. And there are many situations that can get in the way, like involuntary separation, preventing sufficient mothering, including illness of the mother or the infant, with the need for prolonged hospitalization of only one of them following birth, or even death. Although maternal mortality has decreased significantly in recent times, thanks largely to modern sanitation, healthcare, and nutrition, it is still a fact of life. I found on the website Our World in Data that the World Health Organization estimates that in 2017, almost 300,000 women worldwide died from pregnancy-related causes. That is significantly more than I would have thought in this day and age. Our mother's bodies are our first home, and we are born with her voice, scent, and physical presence already familiar to us. We are biologically hardwired to need our mothers, especially as we find ourselves suddenly thrust out in the cold, bright, large, and strange world, and she is the only familiar environment we know. Maternal love is our first experience of what love feels like. The maternal care we receive immensely informs how we feel about ourselves, the world, and others throughout our lives. Such is the importance of maternal care. Yeah. My mother was born in 1931, second child in a family of 6 children. She had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. She married and had 2 children, my brother and sister, but the marriage didn't last a dozen years. She'd been on her own with 2 preteens by the time I came along, unexpectedly, no doubt, when she was 32. She struggled as many a single mother, especially in the 60s and early 70s when there was less support for single mothers. She worked part-time and was on partial assistance. In her mid-30s, she underwent a complete hysterectomy for ovarian cysts. This was in the mid-60s when less was commonly known about the effects of sudden hormonal changes. I don't know what kinds of help was available at that time for women to deal with those changes, but I expect not too much. I understand this caused my mother significant grief, and I doubt she received sufficient support. Hysterectomies were pretty common, and all of the women I spoke to in my family has had hysterectomies as well. We lived in the North End prior to moving to West Kildonan when Garden City Shopping Center first opened, and she went to work there at Sears. After living there for a couple of years and following the birth of her first grandchild, my grandfather suddenly died from a heart attack. My mother had been very close to her father. He was very supportive of her, and I was close to my grandfather as well. He was the most significant male figure in my life. My grandmother moved into the same apartment complex as us, as well as my aunt, who was my mother's closest sister. It no doubt offered some support having them there. Nonetheless, my mother struggled to cope, and psychological help at the time, help for mental illness, was less than ideal. For her, it consisted of medication, primarily Valium, and encounter group therapy. I don't know how many were familiar with that. The encounter group appears to have been less supportive and more harmful, as it seemed to encourage criticism, which is the last thing someone in that situation needs. Eventually, I was put into foster care, which was another blow to her, and she died before Christmas of that year. I was 9 years old and living among strangers, and a social worker came the day after her funeral to deliver the news to me. I don't recall if the foster parent there offered any comfort. I don't remember her being the comforting type, nor do I recall how I reacted or when I next got to see any of my own family. I was to remain in care for the remainder of my childhood, though I did have connection with and visits with my family later on. I was in total of 3 different foster homes, the third of which I was in from about grade 5 until I aged out at 18 and finished high school. I was quite lucky to have ended up in a good group home, which was run more as a family home than many and was in a good neighborhood. Despite the years I spent there, we didn't really keep in touch afterwards. The saying goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I prefer what doesn't kill you can make you stronger and give you some fairly unhealthy coping mechanisms. I was very fortunate not to develop serious ones that often plagued foster alumni. In Hope Idleman's best-selling book, Motherless Daughters, one of the ideals presented by some of the contributors is, would I be who I am if my mother had lived? Would I be the same person? I can say with some certainty that I would not be the same person. Being in care and the way my life went would have significant impacts on who I became. While my sense of self-worth was understandably negatively affected by being placed in the care of strangers instead of my own family, it did broaden my experience of the world and give me differing perspectives. I did have opportunities that I may not have had otherwise, including camping, family outings, a bit of travel, and cultural events like the ballet, which we received tickets to several times. Unfortunately, post-secondary education wasn't one of the offerings, nor was it expected. In fact, not much was expected. There was a sense of belonging in the group home there, as where others were sharing a similar experience of being cared for in a family setting, at least temporarily, but it was by someone else's family, not our own. For some who had no family or whose family was very toxic, it was a haven. Having the connections that I did to my own family is also essential. Having permanent connections and a bit of a sense of belonging to my family. I have an older sister who is about 11 years older, and well, she had a family of her own, and however, the losses and traumas of such sudden extreme life changes have substantial effects, and such a living situation leaves one in limbo, belonging neither fully to my own family or to the one raising me. It has impacted my ability to feel any real sense of belonging in most, if not all, areas of my life. There is an inherent loneliness and sense of isolation, which at times when life has been full, fades into the background, but it never goes away completely. And further significant losses have heightened such feelings. Although I sought counseling on numerous occasions over the years, whenever I felt a strong enough need and could get it affordably, I never found much help in overcoming feelings of despair when I experienced them. Fortunately and gratefully, I never gave up and stopped seeking. Through past counseling, I learned that I have abandonment issues. Who'd have thought? And also that, according to their professional opinion, I'm doing quite well for what I've been through. Well, that's all good and nice to know. It didn't really provide the help I sought, only labels and thin comfort. I hadn't actually started looking into the effects of trauma until about 2 years ago, when there was a service on trauma with our former minister and director of lifespan faith development had a talk on it. And eventually, in the last year, I came upon information literature about attachment theory and about mother hunger and polyvagal theory. And I knew I finally found answers that could lead somewhere. The book on mother hunger has been significant. When a child fails to get their needs met sufficiently from the primary parent or caregiver for any reason, an attachment wound can occur. It can also occur at other times from significant trauma and or loss, though most of the time it does stem from our earliest relationships. British psychologist John Bowlby, considered to be the founder of attachment theory, believed that the earliest bonds formed by children with their caregivers have a tremendous impact that continues through life. He suggested that attachment also serves to keep the infant close to the mother, thus improving the child's chances of survival through the consistent availability of nutrients and protection. His colleague, Mary Ainsworth, furthered the research and developed a method for observing and recording a child's attachment to their mother or caregiver. This method was called a strange situation and helped to identify different attachment styles. Secure, anxious avoidant, and anxious resistant being the main ones she'd identified. Their work has inspired countless studies expanding on attachment theory. Later researchers have developed an adult attachment interview. While it is mainly a research and therapy tool, there are questionnaires that you can take online that may give you a rough idea of your style, if you are interested. But if you really want to know, it's best to get it taken with someone who knows what they're doing, because it's scored more on just the answers themselves. It is believed that only about 60% of people have secure attachment of all demographics. I have only tried the online version, and it points me to having a fearful avoidant style of attachment, which makes a lot of sense to me. Further research sought to follow through on the subjects that were assessed as children in a strange situation to determine how persistent the attachment styles were through their lives, and found it to be pretty high. They also have a strong correlation to the parenting attachment styles that the children studied when they became parents themselves. Parenting can bring you face to face with unresolved issues of your own children, of your own childhood. I recall a quote in a book I have. I learned the way a monkey learns, by watching its parents. This had been attributed in that book to Queen Elizabeth. But when I looked it up, when I tried to verify online, it attributed it then to Prince, to the king, formerly known as Prince Charles. That quip, though trite, does seem to agree with the theory idea of attachment styles being passed down through generations. Growing up in care, I had a lot of freedom. As long as I was not in or causing trouble, and I was going to school and generally behaving, I had freedom to do practically as I pleased. I think those were the extent of expectations to behave and stay out of trouble. While that was, fairly good, other expectations may have helped. And that may have worked well for my own life, but it was no help when it came to parenting, especially after I lost my partner and once again on my own. In that way, my lack of being parented was, apparent. I made another attempt to fill a need for parenting shortly after reaching adulthood and another major life event. I went out to stay with my brother and his wife in Alberta. My brother is 13 years older. I was seeking to get more parenting by my own family, but it didn't quite work well as planned. as I found myself faced with adult expectations instead of the parenting I sought. Whatever that meant, maybe guidance, maybe validation, I'm not sure. I returned home to Winnipeg and concluded that for the most part, other than some support from my sister and others, that I was mostly on my own, at least emotionally. I got an apartment, a job, and set about as I thought of it as the time of bringing myself up. I'd never heard of self-parenting or inner child work, and I still have a hard time understanding what that means, but I'm currently working on it. I would need to make the best of it, my life, with the family and friends I had, and I did. Soon after, I would have more of a family as I met my late partner, lived together, and had a daughter. Although in less than a decade, I'd be on my own again, but raising a daughter. I'm not sure how long ago I had discovered Hope Edelman's book, Motherless Daughters, and that could have been helpful, but it wasn't at the time. I recall reading this in the introduction. For a long time, it was all you needed to know about me. I had dark hair on the short side, and my mother died when I was 19. That was written by one of her contributors. That and other stories about how all-consuming it was to be a motherless daughter kind of deterred me from reading it further. I didn't want to identify with that loss, to be known for that. I didn't want to be affected by it. I suppose I wanted to minimize the effect it had on me. I also noticed in just the last couple of years how over the course of my life I almost stubbornly refused to attach to an alternate mother figure. That struck me as odd until I started researching attachment theory and saw the effects of attachment wounds. As I began to actually open to the idea that I was more affected than I realized, I wondered too the extent it had on my parenting, no doubt a lot. As I am about to enter my 60s, I am finally now working on addressing this, on acknowledging the loss and effect it's had growing up without my mother. Life is growing and healing continually. So, anyone who heard me speak last night may recall I mentioned I used to be a smoker. Well, smoking is no longer cool, was it ever. I'm going to repurpose an expression from smoking culture and bid you, on this Mother's Day, to hug 'em if you got 'em. Them being mothers, mother-in-laws, stepmoms, any moms, partners, lovers, whoever is nurturing you now. Hug them, or if they're not near, call them. God bless you this day and every day.